Ladies and gentlemen, it is finally here. There is real live college football this weekend. And also, it's time for Birm's favorite word. It is the penultimate Freaky Friday before there's real live Ohio State football. Welcome to a Freaky Friday on the beat. He's Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. And the mailbag is bustling. It's busy. It's bursting. It's other B words. I don't know. That's how exuberant I am for the start of college football.
Fine, it's fine. It's not real football. It's not Ohio State football. Ohio State football marks the beginning of real football.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Although Ball State football maybe does not, but that's okay. We're going to get at least half of real football on next Saturday. It's another
B word.
Next Saturday. It's just good that we made it through the offseason. We really have done, I think, a pretty good job of weaving our way through the tapestry of these last 8 months. We appreciate all of your help getting us there. TheAustinandBirmShow at gmail.com is how you become a part of this show, which a lot of you already have. And we need to just probably dive in. Let's get it started.
Okay. There's no time to waste because it is a 5-time Freaky Friday. We've got, one person had a 2-part question, so maybe that's 6, but that's not alliterative. So I'm just going to go with 5. This came in from Rusty. He said, Jeremiah Smith is the only player ranked in the top 50 from Ohio State on the NFL draft boards for next spring. Can JJ and the Miracles win a title if that stays true? What players need to elevate their play and draft stock for Ohio State to win the game and the title? I have concerns about having multiple losses this year. That schedule looks tough. I don't think that the draft stock personally has anything to do with Ohio State's ceiling, at least when it comes to the top 50. And here's the example that I'm going to use, Birm. When you're looking at NFL talent evaluators and thinking about their thoughts going into this year, I fully understand why they do not have Julian Sayin on their top 50.
I mean, whose top 50 is this?
I don't know. I don't read, personally, mock drafts in August before the season, before the games have played.
Well, I mean, I think we've seen enough conversation around Julian Sayin where he's at least a borderline end of round 1, beginning of round 2 pick that I don't know where the accuracy comes from here.
I don't know whose it is. I think that there is a consensus from most people that he has to play his way into the first round, which is why, so let's start with that fact. I'm not going to put a ton of stock into the preseason. There's so much that can change between now and obviously January, and then from January to April past that. But if you're thinking about, the eyeball test that these mock drafters or mock board builders are going to have, they're still going to look at Julian Sayin and say, how does this translate at 6'1", 6'1.5", 6'2", 215 pounds? And his NFL evaluation right now, I don't think makes a lick of difference to him being an elite college football quarterback, arguably a perfect fit for what Ohio State and Ryan Day and Arthur Smith want to do at that position to maximize the other skilled players around him, including Jeremiah Smith. And so I know that might be easy pickings right there, but the real key is not to determining the championship how many top 50 players you have. It was how many you might have between 50 and 250. How many NFL talents are on this roster? And that's they may not clean up in the first round in the 2027 draft the way that they did in 2026
or 25.
But the overall scope and size of this roster in terms of professional ability is just as large.
Well, there's also probably the little asterisk here that this is draft eligible players. So it's not really considering the upside of guys like Devin Sanchez, or it's not really going to give a lot of credence. If you have, let's just say, for example, an interior offensive line that has 3 guys who will all be picked in the top 90 of the NFL draft, that's pretty good.
Not going to find a lot of places doing that.
Right. So, and then you have players like Ian Moore who have already started to get NFL or talent evaluators, people who have played the positions, looking at him and saying, hey, that's a guy who could potentially emerge. This is just not someone that most NFL people are really paying attention to yet because he's not been a starter at Ohio State. But beyond that, I think that your point is correct. It's not, the top 50 doesn't matter. Yeah, it sure helps to have 3 of the top 11 picks in the NFL draft, or 4, but Ohio State didn't win a national championship with that many first-round picks either. So, not last year. They won it when they had a combination of those first-round picks and the top 250 guys like you did in 2024 when you had the Emeka Ibukas of the world and the Travion Hendersons and Quinshon Judkins. Ohio State 1 through 85 is more talented than 99% of college football teams and maybe 100% of football teams.
Yeah, and look, I want to answer the second part of the question.
Because the second part I think is more instructive to actually what it takes to win a championship.
And I totally get it. And Rusty is certainly not the only one who's asked about this. Beamer and Jay-Z asked me a similar version related specifically to Julian Sayin on the Buckeye Show on Wednesday night. So I understand why people. And it's always about looking forward. And if you're more of an NFL fan, you're going to be locked in on these draft boards to inform who you should be looking at. Mm-hmm. I think when we're talking primarily to this version of America's audience in Canada and a couple people in France, that they certainly are more. They know who is on this Ohio State roster, and they might have questions about is there actual uncertainty about the high end talent on the Ohio State roster? And this version of the question, who needs to elevate? I just wanted to put out that caveat that. The way too early mock drafts are way too early for a reason, because they haven't seen this upcoming year of film. If you're just making this list on pure intangibles, even a year ago, you weren't going to see Arvell Reese listed in the top 50.
Right.
So, that is all going to be highly subject to change. However, there are still players that would be right now in that next cusp, 50 to 150. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not a secret that you and I would both say the person who needs to elevate their draft stock and elevate the ceiling for Ohio State is Kenyatta Jackson.
Correct. He is absolutely number one on that list for me. If you're talking to the second part of Rusty's question, which is who has to step up, Kenyatta Jackson has to become a dominant pass rusher in the Matt Patricia defense. That has to happen for Ohio State. And if it's not him, someone else. But if it's not him, it will be slightly disappointing because he's in year 5 and he looks like exactly what you think that the elite pass rusher should look like. I think the same thing can be said on offense for anybody at tight end, whether it's Nate Roberts. Those are two spots where I think Ohio State is just waiting to see somebody become a dude, like a real guy. There's plenty of players who could qualify. Jermaine Matthews has to be better than he was a year ago.
Yep.
Jalen McClain has to take. I'm not saying he has to be Caleb Downs, but he has to find a way to.
You've boldly predicted that he will be a first-round pick.
I think Jalen McClain will play himself into a first-round pick because he is what the NFL is looking for from every angle of who he is and how he thinks and how he processes the game and what he is athletically. Brandon Ennis, Devin McEwen. There's a ton of guys that you look at and say, well, if that guy takes this step, then this team goes from really, really good potential to historically great potential. And I've been a little bit hesitant to talk about this team in the terms of this is a championship or bust type of team because the schedule is so hard, as Rusty points out later in the question. But there's nobody that has more talent than Ohio State, top to bottom. So that is why Ohio State is still the number 1 ranked team in the country preseason, despite losing 8 starters, despite on defense, despite having all of the changes that have happened. Simply put, Julian Sayin has to step up. Kenyatta Jackson has to step up.
I was going to say,
everyone.
Bo Jackson has to elevate his game for Ohio State's rushing attack to get to the level that it needs and wants to go win a national title and to win the game again. But he wouldn't even qualify for this list because he is a true sophomore, true second-year player. He's not draft eligible. You said Nate Roberts. They can't be on this list because they can't be drafted.
Right. So the bottom line and the simplest answer is everyone has to be better than they were a year ago because you are losing 5 top 50 picks on defense and you are replacing a historic run at wide receiver coach and recruiting. You are bringing in a new offensive coordinator. This is the 4th offensive coordinator in 4 years for guys like Austin Birm. This is kind of crazy, right? They've been through a lot of change. So everyone has to improve. Julian Sayin is going to be picked in the top 50. I'm just going to tell you. If he has the year that allows him to go to the NFL next year, he will be a top 50 pick because he's just too good of a quarterback not to be.
Yeah, but it's a great point and a great question from Rusty. And as we mentioned Kenyatta Jackson multiple times, Eric writes in, who do you think will become the consistent pass rusher behind Kenyatta Jackson? Cheers from Eric. I wonder if we need to attack that from behind as in the 2 deep or the complement on the other end of the line. Probably both.
Could be both. Maybe a little bit of both. I mean, I just hope Kenyatta emerges as the dominant pass rusher. I mean, that's like the first part of the question, or pointing out that someone else has to emerge behind him, is, I think, burying the lead a little bit, which is that Kenyatta has to become a dominant pass rusher. But I don't know that anybody other than Kari Wilder really has the skill set to be what I would consider an elite pass rusher off of the edge. I think we will see Ohio State do some similar things that they did a year ago with Caden Curry, with a guy like Quay Rasaw. And it will be up to Quay Rasaw, who we can admittedly say we haven't seen a lot of football of, to show that he can handle that. The reason Caden Curry was an elite pass rusher is because he just refused to ever stop on a play. And I think at times the reason that Kenyatta Jackson has not been the dominant pass rusher that people think he is because he does give up on plays at times, or in stretches where Caden wouldn't. And in the college game, when you have that sort of athleticism and that kind of energy and intensity and passion, it generally translates pretty well. I don't think that even to me, the guy who finished second on this team in sacks, and I agree that Kenyatta Jackson will lead this team in sacks, to me, the guy who finishes second is James Smith. And as I talked about on Thursday morning, I think his ability as a pass rusher, his twitch, his get off in the middle of the defense will be the complement. And I think that will be one of the reasons why Kenyatta Jackson has the season he has, because Ohio State's defensive tackle situation is not going to allow for a lot of chipping on a defensive end this year, because you're going to have a hefty rotation at defensive tackle of really elite pass rushers like Edric Houston and James Smith.
I think that, the compliment, and we've said this throughout the entire offseason, I don't think Bo Atkinson is going to get displaced from the starting lineup. But what he does is more primarily based around his ability to stop the run and set the edge. I don't think he's going to be a terror getting to the quarterback. And I don't think that Ohio State is, or Matt Patricia or Larry Johnson are really banking on him doing that. So that takes me, I think that James Smith is a really interesting pick. There's a case for Edric Houston's athleticism to lead to a bunch of tackles for loss and maybe getting to the quarterback as well. But I think that's why I say when it's maybe officially behind Kenyatta Jackson on the depth chart or the different sub packages, it's does Quay Rasaw or Christian Allegro become that next threat? And Christian Allegro is going to have so many opportunities that might be different than Quay Rasaw, or at least I think. We'll start finding out on September 12th. When we saw even just those first three practices, when they got Bo Atkinson out, there were a number of opportunities where that meant that Christian Allegro was going up closer to the line of scrimmage instead of just playing as that second linebacker next to Peyton Pierce. So if that bears itself out over the course of the year, I think there will be enough Arvell-like opportunities for Christian Allegro that he gets to 7, 8, 9 sacks for this team, and that could finish second, very well could. And what you'd love is if this rotation of 4 defensive tackles and 4 to 6 defensive ends plays out, plus the complement of a Christian Allegro or Riley Pettijohn or TJ Alford, or however that shakes out, if you have 8 guys who can get to 5 or 6 sacks, great. Yeah. We haven't seen Ohio State get back to that level since really 2017 in terms of being able to count on a bunch of guys to produce at the same clip, at least the rotation that makes sense of level footing. If that happens for this year, great. Well, that's a real bonus.
Right, but that takes you to Rusty's question, because in 2017 you had Chase Young, Nick Bosa, Tyquan Lewis, Sam Hubbard, Jonathan Cooper. You had.
Is that good?
Apparently, you had a bunch of defensive linemen who are NFL players. So I think that it's really just about right now a lot of unknown commodities that are on this defensive line, and Kenyatta Jackson is the most known commodity, but he is not a entrenched, exactly what you're going to get from him type of guy yet. And I hope ultimately that this question bears itself out in the way that we find out that, yes, Kenyatta is this guy. And then to your point, then you get everyone else to have 3 or 4 or 5 sacks. And that is the ideal scenario for this team. I don't think, again, I think maybe Kari Wilder long-term has the potential to be that sort of guy, but certainly not going to happen for him in year 1 where he's out there getting double-digit sacks. But he's going to be the when you look at the roster and you say who's the guy who will replace Kenyatta and be the true pass rusher, he has that sort of capability, I think. But when you look at Zion Grady or Epi Satanale or Bo Atkinson or Quay Rasaw, or you just don't know what they're going to be, because we confidently, I think, It's hard to say confidently, and then I think
confident-ish.
Quaversaw is probably going to be backing up Kenyatta Jackson or subbing out for him in certain packages, not on the field with him a lot of the time, which is, I think, counterintuitive to the idea that he would be the Caden Curry version or the Caden Curry style player opposite him. But it's really going to be so dependent on game-by-game situations and what Ohio State wants out there. And that is the beauty of what they have on this roster, but it is also the confusion for us right now because there's a very real chance we see less Bo Atkinson against Texas than we do against anyone else, because
also saw a lot of Bo Atkinson against Texas.
Right. So like we just don't know if you're going to be playing a lot of teams that are going 3, 4, 5 wide. You're going to play a lot of teams that are going to try to spread you out with Oregon and USC and Texas. And it's going to lend itself to different opportunities for different players. And it's not, maybe those aren't the games where Bo Atkinson is going to be really asked to set the edge. He's going to be said, hey, we're going to have to put someone in here who's going to go get the quarterback.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to find out a lot more as this season goes along. But to me, the ideal scenario is what you just said. If you can get to 10 or 11 sacks from Kenyatta, and then you've got 5 or 6 or 7 guys that have 4 or 5 sacks, that's pretty good.
Yeah. I know there is something that you are very confident about, and that's that Awaken 180 works.
I am very confident that Awaken 180 works because it worked for me, and nothing really ever had before when it came to consistently knowing how to take care of myself and manage my weight. And it's the app, it's the coaching, it's the lifetime coaching that even when you're in maintenance mode, and maintenance mode lasts forever. That's the thing.
Free coaching for life.
You don't lose weight and then go back to doing everything you used to do and then expect the weight to stay off. So you have to manage it, and you have to learn what you learn and apply it. And Awaken 180 helped me do that. If you go to awaken180weightloss.com, I lost 40 pounds in 8 weeks. He did the same thing. You could probably do the same thing. I'm not going to guarantee it, but I feel confident that you will. Go to awaken180weightloss.com. Start taking back control of your health.
It's just a bold prediction.
It's a bold P.
Not even that bold. Thanks to Eric for that question. This comes in from Ethan. If there's one transfer from last season that you could have back, who would you have in mind? He throws out Jelani Thurman, Tegra Shabola, or Mylan Graham. Don't really think I would go with any of those 3. And it's interesting, Birm, when you look around the country right now at the players that left Ohio State, and then you start following the coverage and looking at projected depth charts, the players that left Ohio State aren't exactly setting the world on fire. And I don't say that to make anyone, feel bad or feel better. Either way, if you were really depressed about the departures in January, or you thought that we were, putting too rosy of a picture on what was happening in the transfer portal, when we've said that the guys that leave Ohio State, it's almost exclusively because they're okay letting them go out the door. I think that's borne itself out. Now, there's a season for these guys to prove that wrong ahead of them. But when you're looking around and you're thinking about even the top of the top, I read a fascinating story, a couple stories by Pete Sampson at The Athletic the last couple weeks. The headlines just really caught my eyes. Like, Notre Dame's wide receivers, still a mess, still a question mark. I said, well, how can that be?
Yeah.
Quincy Porter and Mylan Graham were supposed to snap and make everything better, and they stole them away from Ohio State. And I know that that's cherry picking, and I don't mean to pile on those players who left. That's not my intention. But like, if you look back and you think right now, who left and who did Ohio State maybe not do a good enough job replacing?
Yeah,
I don't know that exists.
I tend to agree, and I think that there's an argument maybe that Bryce West would have a role on this team
not
this year.
Not starting at Wisconsin,
but he's not starting at Wisconsin. I think that there's maybe a scenario where someone like Fahim Delane you would like to have back
third string at LSU,
just to give you a little bit more depth at safety, so you didn't have to rely on a bunch of freshmen. But generally speaking, there's nobody that you look at and say, well, that guy would be a starter at Ohio State this year, because that's, if they would have been, they wouldn't have left, and Ohio State wouldn't have been fine with letting them leave. And I don't think any of them are starting elsewhere.
That I can find.
I'm sure Tegra may start wherever he's at Kentucky or whatever, but
he wasn't going to start.
He wasn't going to start at Ohio State, so like it's okay to move on.
Ethan, I'm also not meaning to diminish the question. It's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
Like, who would you have back? I think I would say Jarquez Carter, but he's not currently starting with the depth for Miami's defensive tackle group. At least that's my understanding. he was one of the ones when he left. I was like, well, that seems pretty surprising given the departure of Caden McDonald. I think the clear blueprint for the way Matt Patricia would have wanted to use him, the way that they reacted and adjusted in the transfer portal with James Smith and John Walker, it's like, all right, well, that's probably an upgrade or at least a pretty good trade if you're going to make it. And you got 2 for 1 with more experience, slightly less size than Jarquez. But
well, that's the interesting thing. From what I understood, Jarquez was a guy that Ohio State was looking at and saying he might not fit the physical mold of what Ohio State's looking for in its defensive tackles. That was one of the explanations of why they were okay with him getting away. They wanted to get a little bit beefier with the defensive tackles. That's why they bring in 330-pounders like John Walker.
He's pretty beefy.
But Jarquez is pretty beefy. And then what I guess this is why I'm going to lean into Jarquez as the choice, because when Ryan Day on Monday this week was talking about players who might play at defensive tackle, he mentioned Damari Simeon, who is the smallest of the 4 defensive tackles that Ohio State signed in the 2026 class, and almost a like-for-like physical comparison to Jarquez Carter. So I guess it doesn't pass the sniff test for me when it says like the reason he left is because, or the reason they were okay with letting him go is because he didn't fit the prototypical size they were looking for when they're replacing him in the depth chart. And I think he would probably be in the depth chart right where Damari Simeon is for Ohio State. I think you're with Edric, with John Walker, with James Smith, with Will Smith. Jarquez probably would be fighting for DT5 with Jason Moore like Damari Simeon is. So I don't think it's ultimately that different.
No, it may be different in that if you retain Jarquez Carter, you don't bring in John Walker.
Right.
And in which case, if that's the domino and the butterfly effect that we're talking about, like that changes the dynamic entirely.
I mean, it is interesting if from a big picture perspective to see what happens to guys who transfer out of Ohio State. I mean, Aaron Noland transferred to Memphis after going to South Carolina, transferred to Memphis, and he's not the starting quarterback there. Like it is.
I think
it's a sign. It's a pretty like clear.
Tell me if this is wrong, and maybe it's an exaggeration, and someone else can. You tell me if there's another example. Outside of Jamison Williams and graduate transfer Joe Burrow, which, again, we don't have to relitigate. They got Dwayne Haskins and Justin Fields out of that scenario. Pair of Heisman finalists. I don't mean to kick over that hornet's nest again, but outside of Jamison Williams, who was going to have a limited role, Ohio State wanted to keep. They understandably, I think, on both sides parted ways with no ill feelings.
Not from their side.
Yeah. Is there another example of someone leaving and actually flourishing elsewhere that Ohio State looked back and was like, gosh, really, really messed that one up?
Well, there aren't many, and there's a simple reason for that. Ohio State is a place where if you can make it at Ohio State, you do. And if you can't make it at Ohio State, it's not generally because you don't have the physical skills to make it at Ohio State. It's generally because you don't have the proper motivation to make it at Ohio State. And then when you get somewhere else that demands less of you, it's easier to just be nonchalant. And Ohio State has done things with guys like James Smith or even Caleb Downs, the guys we hear all the time saying, well, it's different at Ohio State. It's different here. Those guys come in and they get held to the Ohio State standard. When the Ohio State players leave and they're not held to the Ohio State standard, then all of a sudden it becomes pretty easy to be lethargic and say, I went to Ohio State. I'm here now. I'm making my money. I'm good. Why go out and try to set the world on fire when you've got what you wanted out of it, which was.
But is there anybody else even in that same conversation?
I don't think so.
I just can't. I can't think of another example. And it's not to say every January, trust the process. They're going to get it right in every single circumstance. Yeah. But they have over a long period of time, not just a small sample size of this particular class, which is unproven yet still, and it has plenty of opportunities to say that was wrong and they made the right decision or they were undervalued, whatever. They still have that opportunity in front of them. But if you zoom out to the proliferation of graduate transfers, then NIL, then free movement, that body of work, they're 90% right or more with their evaluations. Again, that's not perfection. And it's not to say that sometimes there might not be something that they wish went a different way, because of course there will be. But I do say all that to suggest that probably Mark Pantoni and Ryan Day have earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to roster management.
Yeah, and I understand why people will question it, or why, how do you let all these guys leave? You invested in them as people, as players. You recruited them for years. You did all that, but like once they get there, if they're not swimming, then they sink, and you can't hold everyone up when you've got a roster of that many guys, and there's so many young players that are swimming. It's time to let them go and do their thing, because that is the new era of college football. Ryan Day was talking about it on Monday this week when he said, well, we don't like this idea about the NFL stuff, but if we have to, we will, because they will continue to adapt. They will continue to adjust whatever the game requires. But I think it's pretty clear when you look at the way Ohio State's handled itself in the portal, like they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They know what they're looking for.
Thank you for that question, Nathan. That is a good thought experiment as well. This comes from Mike in Boise. Hey, fellas, longtime listener through the different outlets you guys have been a part of, and I've always followed you wherever you have gone. Thank you very much. And I know 97.1 The Fan and 10 TV. Appreciate you following us right here. 2 questions. With all the NIL and renovating the Woody, would Ohio State consider selling the naming rights to the stadium? Let's start with that, and then we'll get to the second part, because unfortunately, the obvious answer is yes. They will consider anything that will bring in more money. I would hope, if you're asking me, that you don't just remove the Ohio Stadium part of it, that you find a way to incorporate a presenting sponsor for one of the most iconic cathedrals in all of college football, and we don't just have X business stadium,
right?
The Horseshoe at wherever. I would hope that that's the route they go.
Ohio State's shown an ability and a willingness to honor tradition while innovating and
I do
revenuing
outside of maybe like one camp song. I think Ross Bjork has done a pretty good job of that. And so, yes, it will be considered, I think, strongly considered. And as you saw with the jersey patch, it's going to be expensive. Someone is going to have to make a mind-blowing offer, I think, for Ohio State to go down that road. But I don't believe that they're opposed to it. And I feel pretty strongly, and hope is not a strategy, but I don't think that they would remove the Ohio Stadium part of that.
I agree.
Or the Horseshoe part of that.
I agree.
So I think we can all agree that would be the direction that would go. And then Mike follows up with, when I was a kid, I remember seeing Maurice Clarett, in his freshman season at Ohio State and how wild it was. Now I always see him in videos with Ohio State football. I was wondering what his role is and what he means to the program and Ryan Day. Thanks. Keep up the good work. That's Mike in Boise. Birm, I've talked to Maurice a handful of times since he's been back, but it's been a while. You see him a lot more frequently than I have. He doesn't have an official role at Ohio State.
He's an ombudsman. He's a guy who's there to help support the program. He serves in a capacity similar to what CJ Barnett does, with although CJ is an official title. He's a guy who's been through a lot of stuff, and he is someone that years ago, prior to his involvement in the program, was very active on social media and very loud on social media about his displeasure with the way Ryan Day would run his program and the things that were going on at Ohio State. And I'm not entirely sure why, but and from what I understand it, there was a conversation where Ohio State said, hey, if you don't like it, come and check it out. And come in and see it, come in and be a part of it for a minute. And then if you want to talk. But until then, stop talking. And then
that flip switched immediately.
And then the switch flipped immediately, because once Maurice got around the program and got a chance to talk to Ryan Day, those two have a lot in common from a just competitive mindset standpoint. They are both fierce competitors. And Ryan Day does not trust many people. He trusts Maurice Clarett. He asks his advice. He gets his opinions, and he helps keep the team focused on the things that need to be focused on, which, ironically, I guess, if you look back at the way Maurice's career went at Ohio State after he left Ohio State and the way he left Ohio State, kudos to him for humbling himself and saying, I'm willing to come in and change my mind. And Ryan Day and the Buckeyes did, and then he's been a big part of it since.
I want to say it was training camp of 2024, and I know that he was regularly involved and on the road with the Buckeyes all the way through that season and the national championship run. But I think it was like maybe a week into camp, and the leadership group, 16 or 17 guys were circled around somebody leaving the field, and they talked for, 20, 25 minutes. Emotions running high. You could tell it when they broke up that it had meant a lot. And I walked over to Emeka Egbuka and I was like, who was in the middle? I couldn't see who it was. And then they went out a different way. And I was like, who was that? And he's like, that was Maurice Corrette. And he just said, well, that was Maurice. And like, there's not another Maurice around this program. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. And then it almost felt like a one-off, but it wasn't.
No.
And he was regularly around and it didn't ever turn in. And I remember asking Maurice one time, he's like, well, I'm not officially on the payroll here. I can still say whatever I want. But he became a real believer in what Ryan Day was doing. He became a nice sounding board for guys that were making any kind of decisions on or off the field, available to them whenever they need. And that turnaround for him, obviously he has things that he wish went very differently, dating back to the departure from Ohio State. But he's taken a lot of accountability for that. And even with his own words and the questions with Ryan Day, all right, I'll come in, and swallowed his pride and then said, all right, maybe I had this wrong, and threw up his hand to that. So I think you have to give credit to people for that.
100%. And he's important. He's been through things that these guys at Ohio State are going through every single day, and being challenged by things that Maurice was challenged by, and having people who are trying to manipulate them the way Maurice had people trying to manipulate him. So when you have that sort of experience and that sort of to drink from, it makes perfect sense that Ohio State will welcome back any former player that wants to come in and be a part of this program. That is a fundamental component of the Ohio State football program. You can't preach the brotherhood the way Ohio State does and then close your door to former players, even the ones that left on bad terms. If they want to come back and make amends and figure out a way to contribute and help the program, on our show every single Monday, we have guys who played at Ohio. Bobby Carpenter's career at Ohio State was decidedly different than Justin Zwick's. Both of them are around the program. Both of them had different experiences, but
sorry, Jay-Z.
They all want Ohio State to be successful. And it makes perfect sense for Maurice, especially a guy who went through the highest of highs at Ohio State and the lowest of lows at Ohio State in sense, to be able to provide depth of knowledge to these young guys who are going through the same thing.
Thank you, Mike, for sending those in. We'll wrap it up with Alex in Youngstown. Hey, guys, I have loved the coverage all summer long, and I've been very excited to hear you guys talk about all the potential depth on this team. Then I listened to Snap Judgments on Monday, and I started to panic because it felt like I had heard this party line before. Quote, we have so much depth, which really means we can do so many things, is starting to sound like we can turn it on and play faster whenever we want. I'm sure this is just the crazy Buckeye fan in me, but I need you guys to walk me off of this ledge. LOL, can't wait for this season to start. I understand the trepidation because I work with Birm every single day. And on Monday, while he was talking on Snappy Jays, started to go to that exact same ledge.
Yeah, I'm not going to walk you back off the ledge because we just don't know. I mean, there is...
Oh, no. I'm sorry, Alex.
There is a possibility that all of the discussion for the last 9 months ends up being an air biscuit because you just don't know. We don't know what you don't know. You can't know what you know until you know it. And we're going to start finding out that next week.
Once you think you got it.
Then you get got. But this is a team that on paper looks like it can be a 3-4 defense, a 4-3 defense, a bear defense, a 6-down defense. It looks like it can be base and dime if you want. You can base with 4 line. You can do anything you want. It's about finding what works with this specific group. And I'm going to tell you, I think even the coaching staff probably has some still concern. From my understanding, after that first scrimmage, when things did not go well for the defense, one of the things that I heard after that was that Ohio State is struggling to figure out where to put whom and when. But that is normal. When you have so many parts that you did not have a year ago, you had your OTAs, you start figuring it out, your training camp is over, you're now beginning to, so you're going to start seeing what the answers actually are. But until then, it is kind of a veiled, guarded optimism to say, we think we have everything in place to do pretty much whatever we want, but until you see it happen, how can you know? And that to the point about, well, this sounds like we can turn it on whenever we want. I agree.
Well, I think that's important. That part needs to be underlined.
Yeah.
Because if they are saying this, and they're the ones that assembled this roster, which is that you start with that, and if they believe that they have the talent on hand to do anything they want, then it is incumbent and imperative on the coaching staff to maximize that and figure out the best way. The issue a year ago, in my opinion, was that the defense did what it did, and it was great.
Mm-hmm.
The offense couldn't figure out what pieces needed to be used to score in the red zone and be more efficient on these drives. You've got everybody who's heard it, and Alex, everybody who wrote in, everybody who's been watching. This is not new. I've been saying it for 8 months. They did not figure out the best use of their personnel to do the things that mattered most and finish those drives. Everything between the 20s, great. No problem there. Controlling the clock, defensive dominance. Didn't maybe do that on special teams. That's another conversation for another day. But it is then, I think, shifting the pressure on and a reflection of why Ryan Day's made the coaching hires that he has. They have to figure out how to do that. And even Matt Patricia, I think, would tell you, and maybe we'll have a chance to ask him in a press conference soon, where it's like, when do you know? How do you figure out when the right thing is, especially in a year where you have the potential to play 19 or 20 players? Like, that is an ongoing conversation.
Especially as we trend towards positionless football in a lot of ways, because you look at even a guy like Jordan Thomas this week who lost his black stripe. You think about him and you're like, okay, well, he's an outside corner. He's 6'2". He's long. He's moving up the depth chart. He's playing really well. And then you talk to people and they're like, oh, he can play inside too. And you're like, oh, dang it. Does anybody have a spot anymore that they are like locked into? And it's rare and rarer that that's the case.
But even the last part, Birm, I'm sorry to interrupt you. The gas pedal and go fast whenever they want. It's not because they couldn't.
It's not because they didn't want to.
They still had the talent to do so.
Right.
They made a conscientious choice, which, again, that is a reflection of coaching staff and philosophical decisions, and not that they didn't have enough talent or enough depth to play or whatever. And I think that's important. But it's also the way that Ohio State and Ryan Day, maybe more specifically, has built this up, ensures that the accountability and credit or blame, or however the season goes to the coaching staff and not the players, because they pick the players. Mickey Marty's developed the players. They have found ways to account for them all financially. They believe in the people that are on this roster for 2026. So then that removes, in some ways, the pointing the finger or the questions about depth or rotation or anything else, and from the players, and puts it on the coaching staff. Mm-hmm. And that's where Ryan Day wants it to be, and it is quite likely where it should be.
And that's why Ohio State made the investment it did in Matt Patricia this offseason, to make sure that he sticks around, because he's proven an ability quickly to get the most out of his guys and to find out who needs to be where. That's what he specializes in. That's why the decision was made to hire Arthur Smith as opposed to promoting from within for offensive coordinator again. They wanted to have someone who understood structure and understood personnel a little bit differently, someone who'd seen it from different perspectives. That's why they hired Robbie Disher this offseason, to bring someone in to say, hey, we actually do need a special teams coordinator, and it can't just be a guy that is an assistant that we like and he's fine. Like, this is a coaching staff that understands very, very well that it is responsible for whether or not this team succeeds. The Ohio State Board of Trustees, the Ohio State money people have done everything that Ohio State's coaches have asked. So if the coaches aren't getting what they want out of this roster, it's because the coaches are not doing their jobs.
Yeah.
And they will be accountable, and they will not be there at Ohio State much longer if they don't. That's the way it works. Ryan Day, we've said it here 1,000 times, his willingness to adapt and to change and to humble himself, going back to the Maurice Clarett conversation, is like his greatest skill set. His greatest asset is his ability to do that. And it's so rare amongst high-level performing people. Like, that is not normal for people who are in his position. Ryan Day does not believe that the Buckeyes failed when they tried to turn it on a year ago. He just didn't think they needed to. And if they were more efficient in the red zone, he would have been right. So, we can all go back and look at it through a revisionist lens, but I don't think that Ryan Day feels that last season was anything other than a failure to execute the plan that the coaches had in place at times. But if it's not being performed, if it's not being executed, if it's not as efficient as you want, it does fall on the coaches to fix it. And so I don't know, man. When you look at the depth, it is... The reason you bring in Arthur Smith is because you have all these pieces, and you say, well, we can do whatever we want. So then do it.
That's why you're trying to bring in an experienced puzzle builder.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what they've got. I don't know if that's an actual thing. Puzzle builder?
I mean, I don't know. Do people get paid to make puzzles for other people?
Probably. Puzzle companies.
Be weird. You think the puzzle companies pay someone to do their puzzles? Hey, we need this puzzle put back together. You know what I would say if I was the puzzle maker? I'd say, well, why did you cut it up into 5,000 pieces then if it was already together?
Yeah.
You didn't have to break it up.
You didn't have to do the dub.
You didn't have to do it. You could have just left it in one piece. Why would you pay me to put this thing together when you're the moron that just chopped it up into 1,000 pieces?
I don't know.
And now here I am trying to find your edges, find the corners? No, screw you, puzzle company.
Absolutely. Big puzzle, always trying to cause
Don't cut your puzzles if you don't want me to, put them back together.
Thank you to everyone who sent in the questions to TheAustinandBirmShow@gmail.com. That's TheAustinandBirmShow@gmail.com. Get them in early, often, however many questions you want, because the next Freaky Friday mailbag will be on the eve of the Ohio State opener. Gosh, that just sounds so great.
Enjoy football this weekend, folks.
There were also tons of you that just
or don't
sent some lovely messages and comments.
Spend the weekend with your family. It's the last time you're going to see them until January on the weekend,
Or watch football. Do whatever you want. Do whatever makes you happy this weekend, America, Canada, and whoever is in France.
Tom.
And we will talk to you again very soon as Ohio State's game week begins on Monday, and then Ryan Day talking on Tuesday. He is Birm. I'm Austin. This has been The Beat on 97.1 The Fan and 10 TV.